Welcome to this video on the top 10 vampires of the followers of Set, or Clan Setite, from the tabletop role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade. For vampires who believe in the existence of antediluvians to begin with, opinions tend to vary. The Assamites revere their founder, the Nosferatu fear theirs, the La Sombra, Tzimisce, and Ventrue believe theirs to be long dead. The Malkavians think theirs live inside of their diseased minds, but for the followers of Set, they not only believe that their antediluvian is, and always has been, a god, but they worship him as befits a god who will eventually rule all of creation, though there are always exceptions to the rule. So shed your old skin, retract your fangs, and curl up so that you're nice and comfy, and enjoy the top 10 vampires of the followers of Set. Number 10. Nephthys. In ancient Chem, when the forces of Osiris battled against the followers of Set, another power stood by watching the conflict, the werewolves native to Egypt called the Silent Striders. Now, werewolves have human and wolf relatives, called kinfolk, who share blood with them, but lack the power to shape change. Nephthys was one of these kinfolk to the Silent Striders. What's more, she was a member of the cult of Isis, which brought Horus and his army of Shem's Heru back into the world to fight against Set. Nephthys was also lover to one of the leaders of the Silent Striders, Shu Horus. Nephthys guided Shu Horus to a meeting with Isis, a meeting that ended in an alliance between the Silent Striders and the cult of Isis. But despite her service to Isis and her own participation in the resurrection of Osiris, Nephthys still feared death. She feared that she would not be one of the chosen warriors of Horus, or worse, that her heart would be weighed against the feather of truth and found lacking. Set seduced Nephthys with this primal fear, and she accepted his embrace without resistance. As a creature of darkness, she came to Shu Horus again, now as Set's emissary, and offered him the same gift as Set had given to her. Shu Horus refused. Typically, a vampire cannot embrace a werewolf, but it has been known to happen, and such a creature is known to werewolves and vampires alike as an abomination, for good reason. Nephthys' new blood was potent, however, she was no match for Shu Horus, who tore her to pieces. Nephthys' soul descended into Amenti, the Egyptian underworld, to be judged by Anubis upon the scales of Maat. Yet when the Dread Lord reached into her chest to pluck out her heart, he found that it wasn't there. The clever Set had already taken it, both to prevent this very thing and to ensure Nephthys' continued service even after a second death. The judges of Maat conferred amongst themselves and sentenced Nephthys to wander Duat, able to hear Set's voice, but unable to touch the mortal world. Not long after Nephthys' demise, a young Silent Strider named Kefri leaps the dunes, met a Bubastis, a cat shifter named Cones, who hinted to Kefri about the truth of Nephthys' fate. Leaps the dunes vowed to put her soul to rest. Kefri then met a crocodile shifter, a Mokole named Saba, who told him how he could enter the Duat, the shadowlands of Egypt, to find the knowledge he required to bring Nephthys to rest. After a full day of howling a dirge for Nephthys in a place where no human ear could hear, he was admitted into the Duat. He journeyed across the dark land until he encountered Nephthys, one of the guardians of the Duat. The snake-eyed god challenged Kefri to a friendly game of Senet. The god won the first game, though barely. Kefri explained what he wanted, but Nephthys told him to be careful what he asked for, and offered him a second game. If the Silent Strider won, his wish would be granted. If he lost, he would receive nothing, and have to find his own way out of the Duat. Kefri agreed, and the two played Senet again. Nephthys stood over Kefri, watching the game. If Nephthys saw her, he said nothing. She remained hidden from Kefri's sight, thanks to Set's magic, and it was Set's magic she used to twist the outcome of the game. She touched each of Kefri's pieces, infusing them with the smallest bit of Set's power, power that would infect the young werewolf with doubt, despair, and loss. The second game went to Kefri, but as the last piece was moved, Nephthys disappeared, as did the board. Kefri was back in the land of the living, in the valley where he had entered the Duat in the first place. He heard the voice of Neheb-Kau in his heart, telling the young werewolf that he knew who the god was and what the stakes were, yet he allowed Ma'at to fall from his heart and doubted. But his wish would still be granted. He would have the power to dispel Nephthys. Khay'tall returned to his sept and told the Theurges of where he had been and the ritual that he had learned in Duat. The Theurges enacted the rite, howling the crimes of Nephthys, who had betrayed both Isis and Shu-Horus. As the communal fire died, Nephthys stood in the center of the gathered werewolves. As the elders finished the ritual, Nephthys solidified, hardened, and then shattered. Khay'tall let out a wail of grief. This had not been what he wanted, but what his own doubt and fear had allowed into his heart, which forever twisted the rite into one of punishment rather than redemption. While far away, Nephthys' heart crumbled into sand in Set's fingers. The antediluvian smiled. The game had been his. Nephthys now dwells somewhere far darker than Duat, or even Amenti, a place of evil undreamt of by any mortal, vampire, or werewolf. But Set's voice can still reach her, and when her master summons her back into the world, who knows what sort of monster will return from the hell realm of Malphaeus. Number 9. Neferu. Born in the 14th century BC, Neferu was a lady-in-waiting to Queen Nefertiti, wife of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Akhenaten is most famous for attempting to convert Egypt from polytheism to monotheism and the worship of a single sun god, Aten, hence the change of his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten. In addition to being the queen's lady-in-waiting, Neferu was a slave in the temple of Set, which Akhenaten tried to purge. But Akhenaten's own vizier, Ai, was a Setite ghoul, who bided his time and waited for the opportune moment to make his move. After Akhenaten's death, Ai murdered Akhenaten's heir, Tutankhamun, and married Tutankhamun's sister and wife, Anck-su-namun, to become pharaoh himself. Anck-su-namun tried to circumvent the marriage by arranging a secret marriage in advance to the king of the Hittites. She sent her faithful maid, Neferu, to deliver her letter to the Hittite king. The king had agreed to the marriage, but as he traveled to Egypt, Ai's men ambushed the royal retinue and cut the king to pieces. Ai had learned of the clandestine proposal from Neferu's own lips, giving him plenty of time to prepare. Ai was then abandoned by his Setite masters and ruled Egypt for a scant 4 years. The Serpents were far more impressed with Neferu, who had betrayed her mistress and her country in a single stroke. A Setite Methuselah took the girl as his own and embraced her into the clan. Neferu disappeared from history for over a millennium, but when she reappeared, as Julius Caesar sided with Cleopatra against her brother for the pharaoh's throne, Neferu established the Fire Court as a point of contact between foreign vampires and the followers of Set. As Cleopatra seduced Mark Antony with indolence and hedonism, the Fire Court spread perversion and corruption to the mortals and vampires who laid claim to Egypt. Even powerful vampires such as the Toreador Michael, the Ventru Bindusara, and the Gangrel Jala-Najab have petitioned Neferu's Fire Court for help in uncovering lost secrets and ancient lore to give them an edge over their enemies. The Fire Court was a cancer on the Roman Empire until it weakened Rome enough for the Germans to destroy it. Every subsequent empire that claimed Egypt as a province found itself slowly sickened from within as the Fire Court's agents, willing or not, infiltrated their domains. The princes of Europe and the Middle East identified the Fire Court and tried to destroy it time and again, yet each time, Neferu and the Fire Court always returned, seemingly stronger than before. Unbeknownst to visitors, Neferu is in possession of a ritual that corrupts the souls of any who dwell within the Fire Court for too long. The ritual alters the identities and personalities of those who spend more than a day in the Fire Court, and if they stay 5 days or more, they may be permanently changed. Of course, Neferu, despite her imperious bearing, is quite hospitable, plying visitors to her court with spiced vitae, luxurious apartments, and other pleasures, and encourages her visitors to stay and rest easy in her court for as long as they like, while her magic worms its way into their very souls. Number 8. Arnulf Jormungandrsson. Born in Bergen, Norway in 793 AD, Arnulf Simondsson was born to an amber merchant who traveled the rivers from Norway through Russia and into the Byzantine Empire to trade with the Arab merchants of Alexandria. Arnulf was amazed by life in the cosmopolitan Alexandria. Luxuries in Bergen were common household fixtures for the successful merchants in Alexandria. He was disgusted when his father allowed himself to be ripped off by more savvy traders, while he drank away his profits in the merchant quarter. Arnulf fell in with some locals who took the young Norwegian to sample the nightlife of the city. His taste for extravagance and sensuality attracted the attention of the Setites, who took Arnulf to sample some of the real nightlife that only the corruptors of Set could offer. By 805 AD, Arnulf was a willing convert to the cause of Set. After a brief term as a novitiate, Arnulf proposed to conquer Scandinavia for mighty Set. He believed that the Norwegians were unsophisticated barbarians who would easily fall prey to the lures and snares common among the Setites. But when he returned to Norway, he ran into some unforeseen complications. Initially, Arnulf attempted to start a cult dedicated to Nephthys, the great serpent who gnaws at the roots of the world tree. But Nephthys already had worshippers who didn't take kindly to this upstart attempting to subvert their faith or their god. The worshippers of Nephthys wiped out Arnulf's fledgling cult in a single, ruthless strike. Stinging from his defeat, Arnulf reassessed his strategy and decided that Jormungandrsson, the world serpent, might be a better avenue of gathering followers, and he met with modest success in this. Yet he encountered other difficulties, such as the werewolves of the Get of Fenris, the scarcity of resources, and the lack of urban environments in which the Setites so often prosper. Thanks to the Ismaili revolution of the 10th century, Arnulf lost contact with the main clan in Egypt. Regardless, he managed to build a successful Ragnarok cult, the Hall of Jormungandr, that reached to every corner of Scandinavia, made up of retired and wealthy Vikings. This brought him into conflict with the Einherjar, loyal to the Gangrel Methuselah, Odin the All-High, described in the top 10 vampires of Clan Gangrel. As Scandinavia became Christianized and Viking wealth trickled into the coffers of churches and kings, the Hall of Jormungandr lost power. Arnulf's isolation from the main branch of the followers of Set had proved to be a blessing in disguise, as the other vampires of Scandinavia actually forgot that he and his brood were Setites. This enabled Arnulf to infiltrate and profit from a brisk trade in luxury goods in Scandinavia. He succeeded so well, in fact, that he gained a seat on the Primogen Council of Christiania, later Oslo, Norway, in the 18th century, while masquerading as a toreador. In the 19th century, Arnulf revived the Hall of Jormungandr as a fashionably scandalous night spot for artists, folklorists, and posers. After World War II, Arnulf was removed from the Primogen after having the misfortune of throwing his support behind the losing side. The Primogen did, however, allow him to retain his title as the Keeper of Elysium in Oslo, which he uses to patronize nationalist artists and traditional Nordic craftsmen. Number 7. Khay'tall. Many vampires claim the credit, or bear the blame, for the ultimate downfall of Constantinople and the dream of the toreador Methuselah, Michael. And yet, while those vampires may claim the credit for the downfall of the city, only one can claim the credit for the corruption of Michael himself, the Setite Khay'tall. Khay'tall was a Roman slave in his mortal life. His master, Comus Seteberius, brought him on his deployment to the city of Jerusalem to serve the governor Pontius Pilate. Yeah, that Pontius Pilate. Khay'tall was present for the execution by crucifixion of a Jewish rabbi from Nazareth named Yeshua, or if you prefer the Latin pronunciation, Jesus. Yes, that Jesus, Son of God, crucified, died, buried, descended into Sheol, sits at the right hand of the Father, the whole gimmick. But what Khay'tall took away from the execution of the Nazarene was the idea that God had to be a special kind of asshole to require that his son, or anyone for that matter, die in such a horrible fashion simply to appease his wrath. This is certainly a heterodox interpretation of Christianity. Comus Seteberius preferred to entertain his friends and allies in the Roman way, with feasts and orgies. A cup for every guest and a hole for every pole. Sounds like a Hollywood party. Anyway, Khay'tall, clearly a thoughtful slave, was also an observant one, and he noticed that some of his master's guests never touched the food, nor did they ever refill their cups, and when they entered the orgies, it was their unusually long and sharp teeth that they used to penetrate their fellow revelers. One of these strange visitors was named Nephthys. Khay'tall approached the Egyptian one night and asked to become what he was. Nephthys, debating whether to kill the Nurian slave outright or actually take him, asked him why he should be allowed to join. Khay'tall, ever thoughtful, explained that despite being a slave, he knew that no one is truly free. All men are slaves, whether it be to vice, religion, hunger, or even the will of other men. Khay'tall reasoned that if he must be a slave, let it be to a master of his own choosing. Nephthys was stunned at the insight that Khay'tall displayed, at his perceptiveness into the true nature of humanity and the truth of the world that was already akin to the followers of Set. Nephthys took Khay'tall from Seteberius' house that very night and taught him the path of Typhon. Khay'tall would spend a century as a ghoul before Nephthys gave him the embrace, yet his instruction was as thorough as any Setites could be. Khay'tall was dispatched to serve in the temple of Set in Carthage, now settled by Romans over the ashes of the Brujas' folly. There, Khay'tall met the Toreador Methuselah Michael, newly converted to Christianity. The ancient Toreador and the sagacious Setite discussed the nature and necessity of vice. Michael was already spinning his dream of building a heaven on earth in his own mind, but Khay'tall put to him that anything that could withstand the test of time must also be able to withstand both temptation and corruption. Even at this early stage, when Constantinople was little more than a long-standing Greek colony called Byzantium, Khay'tall knew that he had already defeated Michael. As Khay'tall reasoned over a century before, all men are slaves, and Michael was a slave to his dream. Michael would continue to correspond with Khay'tall after he left North Africa for Rome, and then Rome for Byzantium. In 489, Michael, to the surprise and dismay of his fellow triumvirs, invited Khay'tall to Constantinople, and took the additional step of naming the Setite a scion, granting Khay'tall and his brood, organized as the Children of Judas, a rare status in Constantinople under the Trinity system. Michael, who claimed the role of God the Father in the Trinity, had invited the Serpent into his own garden, and the name, the Children of Judas, was not without purpose. Red hair is considered holy to the followers of Set, as Set himself was recorded to have red hair and blue eyes. Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus to the Pharisees, is occasionally described as being red-haired. In keeping with the path of Typhon, to corrupt all religion to the worship of Set, the children of Judas linked themselves and Set with the destruction of the gods, other than Set, and morals, other than the path of Typhon. Meanwhile, Khay'tall distanced himself from the rule of the Hierophants, Set's progeny, who themselves ruled over the clan in Set's absence. Khay'tall now believed that indulgence and vice were ends in and of themselves, rather than means to subvert the aeons or bring about the resurrection of Set. Khay'tall's presence in Constantinople was simply the continuation of the argument he and Michael had been having for nearly 5 centuries, and now was being played out, with Constantinople as the chessboard, and all of the mortals and vampires as pieces on the board. Khay'tall and the children of Judas did their best to undermine every part of Constantinople, plying the Michaelite Toreador's favorite artists and clergy with wine, hashish, and women, until their artistic and spiritual creativity was lost forever, and their faith was broken. They infiltrated and subverted the Dracon's monastic orders, seeding them with Theophidianism until they were practically Setite cults, and the children identified, captured, or neutralized the Antonian Ventru's mortal pawns. For a time, Michael had the wherewithal to counter Khay'tall's plans and moves. But as he slowly descended into madness, the children of Judas gained ground in the city, until the corruption was inextricable. Michael gravely misunderstood the stakes in the game that he was playing. Khay'tall never cared one whit about Constantinople or any of the things in the city. He wanted Michael's soul. Michael's soul had always been the prize, and Khay'tall had played to the angelic Toreador's own arrogance to allow the Serpent to tear away at the foundations of his own dream and his sanity. During the events of the Fourth Crusade, when Constantinople was sacked in 1204 AD, Khay'tall was ambushed by his own child, Sarrasine, who attempted to diabolise his sire in the chaos. But Khay'tall had long removed his own heart using Serpentis and commissioned the ravenous wondermaker Gregorius Lakiteritos to forge the heart into an amulet. The Setite merchant Andreas Aegyptus came into possession of the amulet, which he delivered to the Red Temple of Thebes. Khay'tall's childer and his philosophy outlived him. In the modern nights, Europe and North America have a number of heretical Setite cults who follow Khay'tall's example of pursuing corruption and personal pleasure for their own sake, rather than in service to Set. Whether or not Khay'tall will defeat the Orthodox Setites in death, as he defeated Michael, is yet to be seen. Number 6. Sarrasine. And we might as well transition from medieval Setites to modern Setites with one of the Setites who survived into the modern nights, Sarrasine, the favored son of his sire, Khay'tall, and also his sire's destroyer. Sarrasine was born in the early 6th century of indeterminate parentage and lineage. At some point he was given over to serve as a page in the court of Justinian I, who notably had the mortal generals Narses and Belisarius in his service, generals that would later be embraced by the clans La Sombra and Ventrue respectively. As a youth of 15, Sarrasine was an androgynous, almost angelic being with platinum blonde hair. Given the nature of the Michaelite Toreador, I'm surprised they didn't snatch him up as quickly as possible. But aside from having an almost inhuman attractiveness, he was also perceptive. His proximity to power led him to the realization that the imperial court was not ruled by the tenets of the Orthodox Church, or even the will of the emperor, but by secret puppet masters who could not possibly be human. He came to the attention of Khay'tall, the leader of the children of Judas, who saw something of himself in the young page, and took him as his disciple, and later his child. But Sarrasine did not share his sire's defiance of Setite teachings. Where Khay'tall believed in corruption for its own sake, Sarrasine craved power, pleasure, and the return of Set. It was this craving that drove him to destroy his sire in 1204, as Constantinople burned. In the aftermath, Sarrasine presented the death of Khay'tall to the Hierophants as proof of his loyalty to the clan. The Setites accepted him into their ranks and inducted him properly into their mysteries. Sarrasine used the lessons from his tenure with the children of Judas to rise within the ranks of the Setites. Seduce, flatter, corrupt, use, and then destroy. Eventually, Sarrasine rose to the level that he was attached to the founding temple in Uganda, the House of Set, and resting place of Set's first child, Nakhthorheb. In the 15th century, Sarrasine was sent to England to loosen the grip of the London Ventrue on that country. Sarrasine took great delight in playing the Toreador and Tremere against the Ventrue, and was fairly successful in his task. But in 1789, Sarrasine, without warning, boarded one of the ships of the Second Fleet and sailed off for Australia. Upon his arrival, Sarrasine insinuated himself into the graces of the Ventrue, Abram, the Prince of Sydney, who made Sarrasine his regent when he uprooted his haven from Melbourne. Abram was later overthrown and destroyed, thanks to Sarrasine's manipulation. And for the finishing touch, in 1900, Sarrasine, masquerading as a caitiff, pretending to be a Toreador to his allies, was invested as the Prince of Sydney. Only a handful of trusted Setites are aware of Sarrasine's true identity. As prince, Sarrasine presides over a court of fiends and criminals, some of whom were original transports from England. He keeps his hand on the spigot of heroin, ecstasy, and human trafficking in Sydney and the state of New South Wales through a web of kindred and mortal gangs. In the later part of the 20th century, Sarrasine, along with the varied kindred of Australia, finds himself beset by the Khay'tall, looking to expand their influence far beyond the Middle Kingdom. Number 5. Danny Larkshill and Mark Sandhurst. And now, you're getting 2 snakes for the price of 1. Praise be to Set. Danny Larkshill and Mark Sandhurst were friends long before they were ever vampires. The two were serfs born in England in the late 15th century. At the dawn of the 16th century, they took to the open road, escaping their estate and lord for the freedom and uncertainty in a quickly changing world, as the Protestant Reformation spread across Europe like wildfire. Larkshill and Sandhurst's travels took them to Greece in 1520, where they were ensnared and embraced by a Setite named Lucretia, who is not the same Lucretia as the high priestess of the Setite temple in London, who met destruction at the hands of the newly reawakened Christophe Romuald during the events of the game Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. The Grecian Lucretia used the escaped serfs as muscle without bothering to properly induct them into the mysteries of Set. Blood bonded, they had little choice but to serve until Lucretia met final death at the hands of a member of the Cainite heresy. But Larkshill and Sandhurst survived, and with their blood bond broken, they took to the road again, this time hiring themselves in the wars between the Camarilla and the newly formed Sabbat, as mercenaries on the Camarilla side. Larkshill and Sandhurst have been so successful that they occupy a rare strata within the Camarilla. They have served as Archons to multiple Justicars from multiple clans, though they have kept their identity as Setites to themselves. They have no loyalty to Set or to his cause, but they know that it would create problems with their employment if it were discovered. Currently, they are in the service of the Toreador Justicar, Madame Gil, as her enforcers, while she, well, you'll just have to wait until the top 10 video on Clan Toreador to learn all about Madame Gil's eccentricities. Contrary to the whispers of the Camarilla rumor mongers, Larkshill and Sandhurst are not lovers, nor are they inseparable. While they are friends and a deadly combination, they often spend weeks and months apart without incident. Sandhurst has a longtime lover and has cobbled together something of a makeshift family of his own, with several children taken under his wing. Larkshill, by contrast, has no interest in companionship. Neither of them bother to correct anyone on the true nature of their relationship as old friends and partners in crime. In fact, they realize the utility of deception and uncertainty in the modern knights. They still affect the air of good-natured rustics, just a couple of farm boys out minding their own business and having a good time, which conceals the fact that they are two of the most dangerous killers on the Camarilla's payroll. But Mark Sandhurst has a secret of his own that he has kept from everyone, including Larkshill. Since 1978, he has been an agent of the Sabbat. The Sabbat captured Sandhurst while he was on a secret mission in Guyana and subjected him to the creation rites, breaking his old loyalties to the Camarilla. Since then, he has sent along crucial information on the activities of the European Camarilla to the consistory in Mexico City. The Sabbat has warned Sandhurst that the time for observation will soon be over, and that they will call on him to take action against the Camarilla. Number 4. Dawn Cavanaugh. Dawn Cavanaugh was born in 1882 to British parents stationed in Khartoum, Sudan, with the army under the command of General Charles George Gordon. But when Khartoum fell to the armies of the Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmad, on January 26, 1885, Dawn's parents were killed in the fighting, and the young girl was taken as a slave in the house of one of the sheiks who supported the Mahdaists. Dawn grew up into a red-haired beauty, which is precisely the sort of thing that draws the eyes of the Setites. Even more important than the fiery mane that was a clear indication of Set's favor, Dawn developed great skill at subterfuge and misdirection, necessary for surviving in the treachery of a sheik's court. When Setites arranged for her to be kidnapped from the sheik's household, they were pleased to discover that Dawn was utterly amoral and concerned largely with her own position and survival. So she was given the gift of the embrace straight away in 1898. For 15 years, Dawn served in the Grand Temple of Set as an initiate and a traveling emissary of corruption and decadence in the Middle East. She found her most receptive audiences in the cities and towns with European immigrants and colonists. But when World War I broke out in the Middle East, Dawn decided that it would be in her best interest to go somewhere a bit more stable, and boarded a ship for San Francisco, California. She stayed put in the city by the bay for a few years before she felt a calling to move south to the scenic and in 1923 largely undeveloped hills of Malibu. Upon her arrival in Southern California, she established a Temple of Set, which drew both mortal and vampires alike throughout the area, and won many new converts to the cause of Set. Hollywood's reputation as the sin capital of the world was due, in no small part, to Dawn's influence on the burgeoning film industry. But in 1944, Dawn's influence in Southern California was destroyed thanks to the bourgeois anarch Jeremy McNeil and his Second Revolt, which killed or ran off most of the elders of California. Suspiciously, Dawn's Malibu temple was attacked by a pack of werewolves about the same time. Now, werewolves might not be good for very much, but they do one thing very well, and that is to kill everything in sight, which they did to Dawn's acolytes and worshippers in the temple. But Dawn was not there. She had gone up on a trip to visit the Temple of Set in San Francisco. The timing of her trip has always been regarded as very convenient, as if she knew the werewolf attack was coming in advance and left her followers to their fate. Set protects his own. She remained in San Francisco for over 20 years until the Sabbat laid siege to Los Angeles in an effort to overthrow the Anarchs. When the Anarchs managed to throw back the Sabbat invasion, Dawn snuck back down to Southern California and established a new temple, this time in the Hollywood Hills. Her second temple was even more successful than her first. Dawn even managed to find a protege among her new acolytes, a vampire named Nicholas, whose ambition was on par with his beauty, ruthlessness, and seductive prowess. Unfortunately for her, Nicholas was a bit too ambitious for his own good. Hoping to seize the temple for himself, Nicholas tipped off the Anarchs to Dawn's location. But instead of blindly rushing to the attack, the Anarchs traced Dawn to the location of the Hollywood Temple itself, and informed Jeremy McNeil, who promptly led a coterie to destroy the temple and everyone in it. That included the ambitious Nicholas. But one of Jeremy McNeil's coterie had already been corrupted by Dawn, and he warned her that the attack was coming. She fled that very same night to the city of Chicago. Dawn remained in Chicago until 1993, when the city was attacked by werewolves, leading to the destruction of many Camarilla vampires, as well as a siege by the combined forces of the Sabbat and the Black Spiral Dancers. Dawn slithered back to Los Angeles rather than wait to see who emerged victorious from the fight. Upon her return, she had 3 goals. First, the downfall of Jeremy McNeil and the Anarchs. Second, the complete corruption of the city of Los Angeles. And third, the re-establishment of the Setite Temple in Southern California. Number 3. Djoser Jones. Joseph Jones was born around 1886 in the United States. Ever since he was a child, Joseph loved everything about religion. He loved the pageantry, the hymns, the call and response, and even the confession and the remission of sins. Joseph loved it so much that he would even invent sins just so that he could confess them. When he reached adulthood, he studied for and was ordained as a Baptist minister and built a small church of his very own. He worked hard to be a good example to his congregation, yet his own flesh and spirit were weak. He lusted for some of the women in his congregation. He drank a bit more wine than he needed to relax. But he prayed earnestly for forgiveness and felt, in his heart, that he had been forgiven. Yet he did not confess his sins as he did in his youth to anyone. Meanwhile, convinced of his own forgiveness and position as one of the chosen, he continued to sin, and his sins grew more enormous in time. By the time he came to the attention of the Setite Sangris, Jones had 2 mistresses, an illegal cache of bootleg whiskey, and a bank account fat with tithe money embezzled from his church. Sesocrates was so amused by the Reverend's hypocrisy, he introduced Jones to several new and pleasurable sins, chains really, to introduce Jones to the manyfold path of Typhon, and that only Set could truly absolve Jones of his growing litany of sins. Sesocrates made Jones his ghoul for a decade. Domitor and Ghoul set up a nice little bootlegging operation out of Jones's church. The errant federal agents unfortunate enough to investigate the good Reverend's church for violations of the Volstead Act ended up buried beneath the floors of the church basement, right under the barrels of Canadian whiskey Jones and Sesocrates sold off to the speakeasies. In the daylight hours, Jones preached a new gospel to his congregation. He still described them as the teachings of Jesus, but now, the true Savior he spoke of was Set. When the federal government finally came to its collective senses and passed the 21st Amendment, Jones and his mentor simply shifted products. Instead of importing Canadian hooch, they would import women. And it was a good little racket for a while. Jones even convinced his congregation to build him a bigger church, with a bigger basement. But all good things must come to an end. When the FBI began investigating Jones in connection with a teenage girl abducted and transported across state lines for the purposes of sex, i.e. a Mann Act violation, Jones and Sesocrates hurriedly burned down his new church and disappeared, leaving the authorities with a body close enough in appearance and age to Jones to throw them off the scent. Sesocrates was pleased with Jones's progress and embraced him in 1934. Jones would serve Sesocrates for another decade before he grew dissatisfied with his lot. In his now dead heart, he knew that God, or rather Set, had called him to be more than a mere bootlegger and pimp. Jones Egyptianized his first name and left his sire's service in 1944. And so, the Reverend Djoser Jones was born. The good Reverend is something quite unusual for the followers of Set. They are quite familiar with the trappings and forms of rituals and high religion, but Jones, crisscrossing the country in his van with his 2 ghoul musicians to drop in on Setite temples and cults, and putting on an energetic, interactive, tent revival-style Setite religious meeting, complete with hymns, snake handling, and religious rapture, has simply not been done. Even jaded Setites have found themselves swept along in the emotionality of Jones's preaching, and their commitment to Set has been reinvigorated, though some Setite theologians scoff at Jones and his unusual understanding of the path of Typhon. Specifically, Jones's belief that Set wants his followers to sin, so that Set can demonstrate his mercy by forgiving them. And nothing brings the Reverend Djoser Jones greater pleasure than knowing that he has led another lost soul back into Set's loving embrace. Number 2. Sangris. One of the wonderful things about religion is that eventually, heretics pop up. The followers of Set actively nurture heresy when it benefits them, yet they tend to take a rather dim view of heretics against the worship of Set. The Serpents of the Light are a very, very heretical sect of Setites aligned with the Sabbat, and like their fellow Cainites, they want to kill all of the antediluvians, including Set, before the grandsires kill them. Sangris was born in early 20th century Haiti at the ground zero of the Serpent of the Light heresy. In 1949, Sangris was inducted into the cult of Legba, one of the Serpents of the Light cults in Haiti. The Haitian Setites were rather vicious in tearing up this upstart heresy from its territory. Haiti is rather far away from the Sabbat's main interest in North America, and while the Serpents were technically aligned with the Sabbat, help was not readily forthcoming against the Setite onslaught. Sangris therefore turned to darker powers for aid, and that darker power's name was Bothethel, one of the Decani. Now, if you watch the top 10 vampires of Clan Bruja, you'll remember that the Decani are plague demons. Sangris was introduced to Bothethel by a Malkavian infernalist named Sedelia of the Tongue. A bargain was struck between vampire and demon. Sangris would spread a new plague, ambition, with his own soul thrown in as collateral. In exchange, Bothethel would give Sangris demonic power to combat the Haitian Setites. The Setites had bigger fish to fry, though, as they had set their sights on the Sabbat city of Montreal in the 1960s, arriving mixed in amongst the Haitian immigrants to Canada. The leader of the Haitian Setites, Gerard, distracted the Sabbat with information that a rival of his would be arriving ahead of him. The Sabbat promptly destroyed Gerard's rival while he slipped into the city undetected. By the time the Sabbat realized Gerard was in Montreal in 1972, he was too well entrenched in the mortal infrastructure to be driven out by mere violence. The Sabbat destroyed a Setite blood cult led by Gerard's child, Moshe. Gerard retaliated by arranging some daytime construction near the Sabbat's underground communal haven, the Temple of Eternal Whispers. Sangris arrived in Montreal as if by providence, though he had his own reasons for flying north that had nothing to do with the love of the Sabbat. Sangris, regretful of the bargain he struck with Bothethel, was looking for a way out. He learned of another Decani trapped beneath Montreal named Matathiax. Sangris reasoned that even if he met final death in Montreal, it would create a dispute between the Decani lords over the ownership of Sangris' soul. Bothethel might have a better claim, but Matathiax would not allow his brother demon to violate his territory to actually take Sangris' soul. Upon his arrival, Sangris immediately organized a pack of snake hunters with the backing of the shepherds of Cain. The snake hunters neutralized Gerard's mortal pawns and put the municipal power back in the hands of the Sabbat. While most Sabbat believed it was Sangris' brilliance that turned the tide against the Setites, it had a little more to do with the lesser demons that he summoned to counter the Setite spirit allies. Meanwhile, the Setites were pried out of their holes and killed as only the Sabbat kill their enemies, brutally, painfully, and with great relish. In 1974, Gerard was the last Setite left in Montreal, but Sangris needed Gerard to die in a public and spectacular fashion, if only to entrench himself permanently in the Montreal Sabbat. During the feast of the 12th night, the holiest feast night for the Montreal Sabbat, Sangris used a pact he made with Matathiax to poison the mortal vessels that the Sabbat would feed upon during the feast. Every Sabbat who fed fell into a deep torpor, except for Sangris, Pierre Belmer, who was already a servant of Matathiax, Elias, who had been warned by Sangris not to partake of the feast, and the Road Wolves Nomad Pack, who arrived late. Sangris immediately accused Gerard of the poisoning and directed the Road Wolves' ire against the Setites' main temple. He had known of the location of the temple for some time, but was waiting for the right moment to use the information. The Road Wolves, at Sangris' suggestion, attacked the temple head-on and were wiped out. Meanwhile, Sangris, Belmer, and Elias snuck into the temple to assassinate Gerard. Sangris and Belmer battled Gerard in a war of dark thaumaturgy against Setite sorcery. By the end of the fight, Gerard was dead and the temple was burned, melted, and boiled into a charred ruin. Sangris, Belmer, and Elias returned to the Temple of Eternal Night as the Sabbat were shaking off the effects of Matathiax's poison. They realized that several of their fellows were missing, including Archbishop Veronique Lacruelle. These missing Sabbat had been taken by Matathiax for his demonic amusement. Sangris stepped forward to replace Archbishop Veronique, and none of the other Sabbat had the strength to challenge him. Sangris' brief rule of Montreal as Archbishop was surprisingly more benign than one might expect from an infernalist. He secured the support of the powerful shepherds of Cain by keeping Montreal quiet so they could pursue their studies. For the more hot-blooded Sabbat pacts, he sent those against the Camarilla city of Ottawa. In 1978, Sangris' attacks on Ottawa were so effective that Prince Jonah was assassinated by one of his own primogen. He intentionally never conquered Ottawa, preferring to keep it as a weakened but alive chew toy for the Sabbat to vent its occasional fury on. But the Sabbat Inquisition uncovered Sangris' prior association with Sedelia of the Tongue, who had been tried and convicted in absentia for infernalism, which aroused their interest in Sangris. The Inquisition dispatched Knight Inquisitors Tristan and Isolde to Montreal to uncover evidence of Sangris' infernalism. In May of 1992, the Inquisition sent a tribunal headed by Judge Inquisitor Santiago de Soto to arrest and try the Archbishop. Several of Montreal's Sabbat prepared to rise in Sangris' defense against the Inquisition, but he surrendered himself to their custody without a fight, and admitted flatly, and without qualification, that he was an infernalist. Despite the harsh questioning of the Inquisition, Sangris maintained that he had acted alone, though he did maintain a small cult of mortals for his use. Those unfortunate mortals became the newest addition to the Black Grove in the Church of the Forsaken. The Black Grove is the product of a thaumaturgy ritual that converts mortals into blackened trees that wail in agony as their souls are trapped for eternity in the magical grove. Big ouch. Every Sabbat in Montreal was questioned during the 3-month-long trial of Sangris, including Sangris himself, despite being put to the question, implicated no other vampires in his crimes. Though he did mock the Inquisitors by claiming that the unbridled ambition of many of Montreal's Sabbat gave him more than enough assistance in his plans. Sangris' favorite child and rising star in the Black Hand, Ezekiel, returned to Montreal for examination. On August 15, 1992, Judge Inquisitor de Soto declared the auto de fe against Sangris, having amassed no further evidence of a larger conspiracy of infernalism. 2 nights later, de Soto personally executed Sangris with a mystical flame, and with that, the tribunal was closed. But the story of Sangris was far from over. You see, Sangris had planned for just such an eventuality. He spent months before enacting a spirit thaumaturgy ritual on his own flesh. As de Soto put Sangris' body to the fire, his own soul flowed out of his body, which was quickly replaced with Sangris' soul. Though the body that burned was Sangris', the soul that the Decani lords received was that of Santiago de Soto, while Sangris slipped away from the execution in de Soto's body. Sangris, masquerading as de Soto, promptly retired from the Inquisition to a mansion in Westmount. 2 things keep Sangris in Montreal. First, the fear that if he were to somehow die outside of Metathiax's domain, Bothethel would instantly move to claim Sangris' soul. The second is Sangris' child, Ezekiel. Though Sangris knows his own soul is forfeit, he tries to keep Ezekiel from falling into the grasp of Metathiax, though this is made difficult by the fact that Ezekiel wants nothing to do with his sire's executioner, and so shuns Sangris while in de Soto's body. Meanwhile, Pierre Belmer slinks around Ezekiel, offering him friendship, while trying to lure him into the demon's service. Number 1. Kemintiri. Kemintiri was born in the 13th century BC in Egypt, during the reign of the pharaoh Seti I. Seti, or the son of Set, was a disciple of the antediluvian, revered by the followers, who would have been driven from Egypt centuries before by the cult of Isis and its immortal warriors, the Shemsheru, or mummies. But Isis, sister and wife to Osiris, the undying king, and mother to Horus, the chieftain of the Shemsheru, was dead, and gone to Amenti to rule over the Egyptian dead at her husband's side. With Isis, Osiris, and Horus safely dead, Set could once again slither back into Egypt, and plied Seti I with promises of power and the eternal reign of his line. Seti built his patron vampire one of the grandest temples ever constructed to dwell in, and gathered the finest women in the kingdom to serve as temple priestesses. One of those women was Kemintiri. Kemintiri was adept at navigating the treacherous waters of temple politics, and soon became one of Set's most powerful priestesses. Set never drank from her, or gave her his own blood, but complimented her beauty and her insight. For her part, Kemintiri was beguiled by Set's otherworldly grandeur, his red hair and blue eyes that seemed to burn like fire. But Set did not flatter without purpose. He was cultivating this flawless serpent to slip into the cult of Isis, who possessed the weapon that had driven him from Egypt in the first place, the spell of life. Kemintiri, whose loyalty to Set bordered on madness, agreed to infiltrate the cult and bring him the spell of life so that he could create a legion of deathless warriors and sorcerers of his own. As she had in Set's cult, Kemintiri played the chameleon, and changed her colors as she needed to ingratiate herself to the cult of Isis while learning all of its secrets. All the while, Set waited, coiled in the shadows, for Kemintiri to bring him his ultimate prize. But then, Horus returned from his death cycle. Kemintiri, now confronted with one of the truly immortal, was fascinated by Horus in a way that she had never been by Set. She had heard the stories of the struggles between Osiris's family and Set, but to stand in the presence of the warrior king was a revelation. Horus told her his story, and the stories of his father, his mother, and his warriors, and their conflict with his uncle. When he finished, Kemintiri became a true believer in Horus and the cult of Isis. She confessed everything about Set's plans to Horus, not caring if the lord of the Shem's-Heru killed her for her treachery. Instead, he forgave her, and presented her to the sorcerers of the cult as an example of how the best of Egypt had been manipulated and used by Set for generations. Then he set down strict rules for who was to receive the spell of life thereafter, and restored order and honesty to the cult of Isis. Set was furious at Kemintiri's betrayal and Horus's return. She had the spell of life, and he would pry it from her, even if he had to break every bone in her body, and tear her sinews, and flay every inch of her skin to acquire it. He commanded his followers that Kemintiri was to be captured at all costs. The Setites managed to distract Horus and the cult of Isis long enough to isolate and capture Kemintiri. Her magic, strong as it was, could not overcome the numbers and power of the followers of Set. When Kemintiri was brought before Set, weakened and injured, she cursed him, and vowed that she would never give him the spell of life. Set tried to dominate her will, but perhaps it was her own newfound purity of spirit, or the magics of the cult of Isis, but his efforts were wasted. Seething, Set beat her within an inch of her life, and threatened her with the most brutal tortures imaginable. But despite each one, Kemintiri kept her silence. Horus and the cult launched a rescue attempt to free Kemintiri from Set. The antediluvian, brimming with desperation and spite, seized Kemintiri and embraced her. The effects of the embrace altered not only the body, but the soul as well, tearing out part of the mortal soul to make way for the beast. Without a complete soul, Kemintiri could never join the ranks of the Shem's-Heru. Set, in his complete display of ultimate malice, stole her destiny and violated her soul forever. But Set did not find his new child as pliable as he might have liked. The same power that protected Kemintiri from Set's attempts to dominate her also made her immune to the blood bond. But Set merely laughed and bid her return to her friends in the cult of Isis, whispering to her how they would now destroy her, not only to protect the precious spell of life, but because she was his, now and forever. But she mocked her new sire, dared Set to destroy her and lose the spell of life forever himself. Set flew into a rage. He could not kill her, so he resolved to beat her mercilessly night after night. One night, she mustered one of the spells that she had learned from the cult of Isis and sent Set flying through the walls of his own temple. She fled out into the desert and was soon lost. For centuries, Kemintiri stalked the dunes and oases, feeding without mercy from the nomads and traders who traveled across the sand. Her humanity withered until she became a wight, as the beast consumed her soul. That should have been the end for Kemintiri, but for the intervention of Khay'tall, the leader of the children of Osiris and the first disciple of the god king. Khay'tall had heard tales of Kemintiri from his followers and tracked down the ravening animal Kemintiri had become. Rather than send her to final death, Khay'tall took pity on her, for he knew her story, that she had been turned against her will. The children of Osiris captured her and held her imprisoned until her blood was spent and she fell into torpor. When it was safe, the children carried her to their temple in India to do the impossible, to pry a vampire's soul from the jaws of the beast. Using the disciplined bardo, the children managed to coax Kemintiri's humanity out of the jaws of the beast and began the arduous process of restoring it. It took time and used rituals known only to the children, but in time, Kemintiri was returned to herself. But so did her hatred for Set also return, who denied her the true immortality of the Shem's-Heru. She remained with the children of Osiris, reclaiming her lost memories, save for one, never to be returned. The complete spell of life was gone, and she could only remember a portion of it. In time, her hatred for Set grew too great. She frenzied, killing several of the children of Osiris before escaping back to Egypt. There, she found that the cult of Isis had been destroyed by the followers of Set. Set disappeared around 31 BC, the only fruit of his hunt for the spell of life being a corrupted version wrung from the tongue of the last mage of the cult of Isis. The products of this corrupted spell of life were the 7 Apepnu, the Bane mummies. Her revenge against Set denied, Kemintiri has spent the last 2 millennia hunting for texts and artifacts that will trigger her memory of the true spell of life, which she will use to create an army of mummies loyal to her. Kemintiri watched the formation of the Camarilla with great interest. For a while she considered trying to manipulate the Tremere into assisting her with completing the spell of life, as they had once been mortal mages with awakened avatars. Yet the Tremere are too tightly knit and paranoid for her to remain within their clan for long. But the Ventrue, they were perfect. They were constrained by custom and dignity, 2 things she excelled at manipulating to get her own way in life. In 1932, Kemintiri kidnapped and ritually murdered the Ventrue Justicar Michalis. She stole his memories, form, and even his aura with a ritual of her own design called the Eternal Mask, and enhanced the deception with the use of the discipline vicissitude. As Michalis, she embezzled Ventrue funds and diverted clan resources for her own use, specifically archaeological digs in Egypt. But her most audacious act was her shameless use of the blood hunt against her enemies. The Tremere, being paranoid as all get out, noticed the sudden and inexplicable change in the Ventrue Justicar's personality and started investigating. When the Tremere unmasked Kemintiri, she fled like a fattened serpent, with an abundance of Ventrue wealth and information plundered from the Egyptian tombs. To say that the Ventrue were pissed would be a gross understatement. They were so pissed that they lobbied for the official creation of a Vampire's Most Wanted list, which became known as the Red List, and Kemintiri was at the top from its very outset. Now, there might be some confusion in this respect. Since the Red List wasn't created until 1937, several vampires, such as Tariq, had been under what was effectively a Camarilla-wide blood hunt for centuries. However, Kemintiri is technically the oldest vampire on the Red List, older than even Enkidu the Gangrel, and while others have probably been under a blood hunt longer than her, such as Tariq and Rabat, Kemintiri was the first name put on the Red List. Since the list's secret inception in the late 1930s and its publication to the Camarilla at large thanks to the Toreador, Kemintiri has killed any Alistairs and neonates so ambitious or eager enough to improve their station that they would risk their lives against a Setite Methuselah. But the Camarilla aren't the only ones hunting for Kemintiri. The followers of Set are hunting for her for the same reason they hunt Enkidu and the Typhonian beast. They believe that they can use her to locate and revive their dreaded lord. The children of Isis also want Kemintiri destroyed, not only for her abuse of their hospitality and the murder of their members, but they understand that if she somehow succeeds in her goal of rediscovering the spell of life and creates an army of mummies loyal to her, she may destroy both the worlds of the living and the dead. And that was the top 10 vampires of the followers of Set. Pulling this list together for these guys was a lot harder than for Clan Giovanni. Hopefully the next one is a little bit easier. Coming up sometime next week will be the top 10 vampires of Clan Toreador. Until next time.